Welcome to today's custom-tailored deep dive. We know exactly why you are here.
You want to get thoroughly informed.
Right. You want to understand the complex machinery operating behind the headlines, but you absolutely do not want the overwhelming information overload that usually, comes with it.
You want the signal, not the noise.
Exactly. And today we have an incredibly dense, fast-moving stack of notes to get through.
It is a phenomenal amount of complexity to digest today. I mean, we are looking at a situation where the geopolitical ground is shifting almost hourly.
Yeah, it really is. So our mission today is to guide you through a fascinating transcript from the Dutch television show Pa and de Wit.
Right.
We're unpacking the rapidly expanding war in the Middle East, the massive waves of U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran, and specifically how a country like the Netherlands is getting pulled directly into the fray.
It's a lot to cover.
It is. But before we get into the tactical maneuvers and the political debates, we need a quick note on how we approach this.
Very important.
Because your source material deals with highly politically charged content involving the U.S., Israel, Iran, and intense debates over international law, we want to make one thing crystal clear.
We do not take sides.
We do not take sides. We aren't endorsing any of the political viewpoints or actions mentioned. Our only goal is to impartially break down the facts and arguments exactly as they appear in your notes.
Our job is clarity, not commentary. We are simply your guides to the realities mapped out in this material.
Okay, let's unpack this. We need to start by looking at the sheer global scale of what is happening right now, the military chessboard.
And it is a massive board right now.
Massive. The U.S. and Israel have launched massive, coordinated waves of attacks on Iran, and we are talking about a significant toll here, with over 1,000 casualties already reported.
Yeah, the scale of the strikes is unprecedented.
And the messaging coming out of Washington is incredibly confident. I mean, the U.S. Defense Secretary is claiming complete, uncontested control of Iranian skies.
Which is a huge claim to make.
They are actively stating that they are finding, fixing, and finishing Iran's missile capabilities and their defense industrial base. They've even gone so far as to claim that the Iranian Navy currently rests at the bottom of the Persian Gulf.
It paints a picture of total, immediate dominance.
Yeah.
But what's fascinating here is the stark contrast between those official declarations of victory and the actual reality on the ground.
Right, across the broader region.
Exactly, because despite taking these incredibly heavy hits, Iran is far from neutralized. They are still actively firing off hundreds of drones and missiles across the entire Gulf region.
Wait, how are they still projecting so much power outward if their skies are completely controlled by the U.S.?
They are projecting what military strategists call asymmetric force.
Asymmetric force, meaning what exactly?
Basically, since Iran cannot match the U.S. jet for jet in the sky, I mean, they just don't have the advanced fighter jets to win a traditional dogfight. They use cheaper, highly unpredictable methods to hit vulnerable targets.
So they aren't fighting traditional air battles.
No, we are talking about swarms of cheap drones and proxy militias. They are using these asymmetric methods to hit a vast geographic area.
Right. They've targeted cities in Saudi Arabia.
Including a drone strike that hit the U.S. embassy there.
And they are hitting Doha in Qatar.
Plus targets in Oman.
And explosions have been heard across cities like Abu Dhabi in the UAE.
With breaking news of Dubai being targeted as well.
Plus, there have been a series of drone attacks on a U.S. military base in Iraq.
So it is absolutely not a contained situation.
Not at all. The ripple effects of all those missiles flying across the Gulf are reaching European allies, which brings us to how the Netherlands is getting involved.
This is where it gets really tactical.
France is actually deploying its aircraft carrier, the Charles de Gaulle, to the Mediterranean right now. And they've specifically asked the Dutch to send a naval ship, the HNLMS Evertsen, to help protect it.
And this is where the naval tactics get really interesting. The Evertsen isn't just any ship.
It's not just a standard patrol boat.
Far from it. What's fascinating here is that it's an air defense and command frigate. Its entire purpose is to be an umbrella of protection.
An umbrella for the carrier.
Think about a massive asset, like a French aircraft carrier. It is essentially a floating city. Thousands of sailors, dozens of jets, and it is highly vulnerable from the air.
So the Evertsen steps in.
The Evertsen is designed specifically to intercept incoming threats, like ballistic missiles and cruise weapons. It has an extraordinarily advanced radar picture.
So it can see everything.
It allows it to see anything coming toward the fleet, track it miles above the water, and shoot it down before it gets anywhere close.
So it acts as a floating shield for the French carrier.
It does. But it's also a highly sophisticated command center. It seamlessly plugs into the existing NATO networks.
Because NATO countries all use the same systems.
Right, the same communication protocols and procedures. So
Yeah.
the Evertsen can actually help direct an entire Allied fleet. Its tactical value in the Mediterranean right now is immense.
But there is a massive political hack happening here that really caught my eye in the notes.
The paperwork issue.
Yeah, the Dutch cabinet hasn't actually made the official decision to deploy the ship for combat operations yet. They have a formal democratic process for this.
Yes, they have to send what is called an Article 100 letter.
Which is basically what?
In simple terms, this is the constitutional permission slip. It's a formal letter sent to the Dutch Parliament, the Tweede Kamer, detailing a military deployment and opening it up for debate.
And that formal discussion isn't even expected until Friday.
Right.
But they ordered the warship to start sailing toward the Mediterranean anyway. They did it just to save time.
It's a bold move.
Imagine moving your chess piece across the board before the rules of the game are even finalized. They know it takes days to sail there, so they're anticipating a yes vote.
They want the ship in position the absolute second the political green light is given.
It perfectly illustrates the tension between the speed of modern warfare and the speed of parliamentary democracy.
The military reality on the water is moving infinitely faster than the political paperwork back in The Hague.
And speaking of things moving fast, we have to talk about the absolute fog of war and the shifting strategies coming out of Washington right now.
It is dizzying trying to follow it.
There is a staggering amount of mixed signals from the U.S. administration. Donald Trump has reportedly given 19 different television and radio interviews since these operations began.
19.
And the messaging has been completely all over the map.
The goals seem to shift hour by hour. In one moment, he's talking about having 3 specific replacement leaders in mind for Iran.
Right.
Then, a few hours later, he publicly states that he checked and those individuals are actually dead.
Which is just wild.
Then he pivots entirely and suggests that the Iranian people just need to sort the situation out for themselves.
While you have other prominent U.S. figures explicitly pushing for complete engineered regime change,
It is totally unclear to European allies what the actual endgame is.
imagine being a military strategist trying to draft a cohesive operational doctrine, and your entire mission objective changes based on a radio interview given over breakfast.
It's a nightmare for planners. And this leads to the illusion of victory that military historians always warn about.
The illusion of victory.
Yes. Destroying an enemy's air force and sinking their navy is, relatively speaking, the easy part.
Easy.
Well, it is highly technical, but it's straightforward. You find the target and you hit it. Breaking the will of your adversary, however, is incredibly hard.
Right. Destroying the hardware is not the same as breaking the system.
Exactly. The military analytics in your notes draw direct, sobering parallels to past conflicts. They point out that the U.S. couldn't win in Vietnam, and Russia isn't winning in Ukraine just by destroying infrastructure.
They specifically bring up the 2002 Iraq War, right?
They do. The expert featured in the transcript remember studying in the U.S. back in 2002, noting that all the meticulous military plans stopped at the capture of Baghdad.
There was no phase 2.
Exactly. There was no phase 2. The U.S. military brilliantly executed the hardware destruction, but the vacuum that followed was catastrophic.
So the warning here is clear. Stopping at destroying the military without a concrete plan for what comes next is a massive, dangerous risk.
A huge risk.
Here's where it gets really interesting regarding that phase 2 problem. There are reports that the CIA is secretly operating behind the scenes right now.
The proxy strategy.
Yeah, they are allegedly trying to arm Kurdish militias in northern Iran and Iraq to incite a local uprising.
Which is a classic proxy warfare tactic. You try to achieve regime change using local fighters so you don't have to commit massive amounts of your own troops to a ground war.
But the Kurds are hesitating. Why are they so reluctant to take the weapons and fight?
They're asking a perfectly rational question, what is in it for us?
Right. Why should they stick their necks out?
You have to look at the historical context to understand their hesitation. The Kurds have a long, deeply tragic history of being utilized by the West and then immediately abandoned when the geopolitical winds shift.
The transcript explicitly cites 1991, right, under President George H.W. Bush.
Yes. The U.S. heavily encouraged an uprising in Iraq against Saddam Hussein. The Kurds and Shia populations took up arms, fully expecting American backing.
Because they were told to rise up.
But the U.S. didn't provide ground support. And Saddam Hussein retaliated with unimaginable brutality.
And that feeling of abandonment isn't just ancient history.
Not at all. Look at the Syrian Kurds who fought against ISIS much more recently.
They did a lot of the heavy lifting
They
there.
did the brutal heavy lifting on the ground, lost thousands of fighters, and then felt completely abandoned once the immediate Western goal of degrading ISIS was achieved.
So now, when the CIA allegedly comes knocking, asking them to rise up against the highly organized Iranian regime, the Kurds are deeply skeptical.
Very skeptical. They know that without an ironclad guarantee of U.S. boots on the ground to back them up, they risk facing the full, brutal retaliation of the Iranian state entirely alone.
Let's talk about that Iranian state. When the news broke about the death of the Ayatollah, many Iranians around the world celebrated.
There were massive celebrations in diaspora community.
There was this palpable hope that removing the supreme leader would instantly lead to a free, democratic Iran. Does that kind of sudden collapse actually happen?
It is a very human reaction, hoping that cutting off the head of the snake kills the beast. But the cold reality mapped out in the source is much different.
It's not that simple.
This regime is not a fragile house of cards. It has been in power for 47 years. It is deeply, structurally rooted in the military, the economy, and the religious institutions of the country.
And more importantly, they have meticulously planned for this exact succession scenario.
They've been planning for it for years.
So if the Ayatollah is gone, does this trigger a chaotic power vacuum, or do they have a plan ready to go?
They have a highly structured plan. The succession isn't a free-for-all. It is decided by something called the Assembly of Experts.
Which is what, a committee?
It's an 88-member council. And they're highly likely to choose the Ayatollah's 55-year-old eldest son as the new supreme leader.
The son.
Yes. He has been quietly advising his father for years and is already deeply embedded in the center of power.
Is there anyone in the political wings who could challenge that, or is it basically a done deal?
There are other players. The powerful Larijani family, specifically two brothers who hold a lot of sway, are heavily involved in the political maneuvering.
Okay.
Interestingly, there's also a grandson of the original Ayatollah Khomeini, but the council apparently considers him too progressive.
Too progressive for the council.
Exactly. So the system is actively filtering for ideological continuity. They are ensuring the next leader maintains the exact same hardline stance.
So what does this all mean for the people hoping for sudden democratic change?
It means the core ideology of the regime remains completely intact. The analogy used in the source is that you cannot simply pull down a 47-year-old, deeply rooted tree just by trimming its top branches.
Airstrikes just trim the branches.
Right. Airstrikes and assassinations might damage the military hardware and take out individual leaders, but they don't erase a heavily organized, disciplined system.
So what would it actually take?
To truly topple a rooted regime like this, the consensus is that it likely requires an actual ground invasion. And right now, no Western country seems even remotely willing to risk the domestic and military cost of sending troops into Iran.
Which leaves everything in a very dangerous limbo. And as this conflict drags on, the threat of it spilling over into Europe is becoming very real.
We are looking at a situation that is inching closer and closer to NATO and EU borders.
Cyprus, an EU member, is right there in the Mediterranean where the French and Dutch ships are operating. And then there's Turkey, a vital NATO ally.
The geography here is critical. There was a specific incident recently where a stray missile actually landed in the Hatay region of southern Turkey.
Right on the border with Syria.
Exactly. It was likely intercepted, perhaps by a Spanish Patriot missile battery stationed there to protect Turkish airspace, but the debris still hit Turkish soil.
Think about how wild that is. A NATO country actually gets hit by a foreign missile, and instead of sounding the alarm and bringing the entire Western alliance into a war, Turkey actively chooses to look the other way.
And you really have to emphasize the gravity of that decision. If a NATO country is attacked, they have the right to invoke Article 5 of the NATO Treaty.
The foundational principle that an attack on one is an attack on all.
Invoking that could literally trigger a world war. But Turkey deliberately downplayed the entire event.
You just brushed it off.
They engaged with Iranian officials who claimed it was just an off-course stray. And Turkey chose to accept that flimsy excuse to avoid invoking Article 5.
They intentionally decided not to escalate.
Because they desperately want to keep this powder keg from blowing up in their own backyard.
And that tension brings us to the final and perhaps most fiercely debated part of your source material, the intense domestic political debate within the Netherlands regarding international law.
This is a heavy debate.
It is. And remember, as we discussed at the top, we are presenting both sides of this debate impartially. We are looking at a textbook example of the friction between international legal frameworks and geopolitical pragmatism.
Two very different ways of looking at the world.
Let's start with perspective A. Dutch Foreign Minister Tom Barrets and politician Paternotte are publicly expressing understanding for the U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran.
Their argument is deeply rooted in immediate security concerns and historical precedent.
Right, they point directly to the murderous nature of the Iranian regime.
They highlight the fact that Iran has orchestrated targeted assassinations on European soil in the past, and they point to the regime's ongoing financial and military support for proxy terror groups across the Middle East.
So their stance is essentially that extraordinary immediate threats require extraordinary pragmatic responses.
Even if they blur legal lines?
They also add a very practical European-centric layer to this argument regarding Ukraine.
The missile stockpiles.
Exactly. They point out that the U.S. is rapidly depleting its missile stockpiles in this Middle Eastern conflict. The fear is that if the U.S. runs out of interceptors defending against Iranian attacks, they won't have enough to send to Ukraine.
And Ukraine desperately needs them to fend off Russian aggression.
So, for Barrets and Paternotte, showing understanding for these strikes is also indirectly about protecting European security and keeping the Ukrainian defense viable.
But there's a fierce counter-argument. Let's look at perspective B.
Okay.
The source features Professor Marieke de Hoon, a prominent expert in international law, who strongly condemns the U.S. and Israel for aggression.
She takes a very firm legal stance.
She argues that these strikes are not just skirmishes, they are flagrant, undeniable violations of the core of the international legal order.
And she explicitly calls out the Dutch government for their reaction.
She heavily criticizes the Dutch government for looking away and playing politics with the law.
What's her core argument there?
Her argument is that international law requires absolute, consistent enforcement to mean anything. You cannot fiercely condemn one country like Russia for violating sovereignty while publicly showing understanding when your own allies do the exact same thing.
And double standard, essentially.
Exactly. She argues that even if you despise the Iranian regime and everything it stands for, there is no legal justification for this level of unprovoked aggression. Failing to condemn it, she warns, undermines the entire global system of laws that protects smaller nations.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what we are really wrestling with in these notes is the ultimate modern geopolitical dilemma.
It's the core issue of our time.
It is the raw tension between adhering strictly to the rules of international law on one hand and taking pragmatic, extra-legal military action against a recognized threat on the other. It's a debate with no easy answers.
No, none at all.
But understanding this exact legal and moral friction is absolutely key for you to be truly well-informed about why governments are reacting the way they are right now.
You cannot understand the headlines without understanding that underlying tension.
We have covered a massive amount of ground today. We've looked at the staggering scale of a rapidly moving military conflict.
We broke down the tactical reality of the Dutch frigate racing to the Mediterranean before the democratic paperwork is even dry.
We explored the confusing, shifting strategies coming from Washington and the deep, historical hesitation of Kurdish militias who refuse to be used as pawns again.
We analyzed the 47-year-old roots of an Iranian regime that is actively preparing to pass the torch to the next generation.
And we walked through the fierce, dividing debate over international law playing out in Europe.
By taking the time to go through these sources with us, you are now fully equipped to understand the nuances of this crisis far beyond those simple, sensational news alerts.
You see the whole chessboard now, not just the pieces.
Exactly. You had the signal, not the noise. And this raises an important question based on everything we've analyzed today. I want you to mull this over.
Let's hear it.
If absolute air superiority and thousands of airstrikes cannot break the will of a 47-year-old deeply rooted regime, and if local militias are too afraid of being abandoned to fight the ground war for us, what does a victory actually look like in modern warfare?
That is a heavy one to leave you with, but exactly the kind of critical thinking these sources demand. Thank you for bringing us such incredible material for today's deep dive. Keep digging, keep questioning, and we will catch you next time.